The top stories: TPLF forces retreat to Tigray while thug leaders beg for peace. Lobbying against Addis as conference hub comes after resistance to foreign aggression. And Rwanda and DRC trade fair seeks to boost trade cooperation. Hello, many thanks for joining us. You're watching Addis News Hour with the news. I'm Tabitha. Do stay with us. EU initiated resolution to undertake a second investigation into human rights abuses in Tigray is none other than a politically motivated act. The Office of the Prime Minister has briefed foreign media outlets today. Sintayo Tamrat attended the briefing and sent us this report.
On her briefing, Press Secretariat of the Prime Minister Office, Blene Seyum, said the EU initiated resolution to undertake a second investigation of human rights abuse in Ethiopia's Tigray region is a politically motivated act. It's also aimed at abusing the international community's resource.
The Ethiopian government acknowledges that the resolution is a politically motivated instrument that is set to discredit efforts undertaken prior and recommendations that had been put forth already by the joint UN Human Rights Office and the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission in their investigation report. Nevertheless, the Prime Minister as well as the federal government took it upon them to rally behind this report and endorsed some of the findings and made sure that a remedial process was launched. This remedial process entailed an interministerial task force to be formed that is currently looking into the implementation aspect of it. So while these processes are already in play, it doesn't make any sense to rally behind new investigations that are looking into the same period as the recent investigation, simply because some did not get the results that they had anticipated. We do recall that the previous report outright rejected these accusations and allegations of a genocide having taken place. The utilization of famine or starvation as a weapon of war was something that was found inconclusive in the previous report. So because this is not something that had settled well with some bodies, to reinitiate a similar process, in essence, is abusing international norms and resources to undertake a redundant activity.
Asked about TPLF reports which followed its recent defeats and huge human and material losses, Blene had this to say.
On the TPLF retreat, I guess those in the international community and media who choose to amplify TPLF's narrative have got their own agenda for doing so. Nevertheless, I think there is an open invitation for those that want to go and document, particularly from the international media, as has been facilitated in many parts of liberated areas, to go document and discuss with those that have witnessed the intense battles, what had transpired as well. So I wouldn't just leave it to a statement that has been issued by an organization deemed a terrorist organization. I think Ethiopia and its heroic forces do not need external validation, as Ethiopians know the sacrifices that have been paid and the challenges that had been countered in order to gain the current status quo, as well as the setbacks that TPLF has encountered. But more importantly, I think in that argument, the TPLF will have to face and respond to mothers within the Tigray region who have sent off their sons and daughters thinking that they would come back.
Ethiopia is optimistic that a proclamation for inclusive national dialogue will open a new phase in its democratization history.
Yesterday, the Legal, Justice and Democracy Affairs Standing Committee of the House of People's Representatives undertook a consultation with various stakeholders to garner input to the draft proclamation. And some of the main duties of this body, as has been underlined or shared within the proclamation, is identifying agenda items that would contribute to national consensus, identifying stakeholders that will need to participate in this national dialogue, convening the dialogue platforms themselves, crafting implementation processes for recommendations coming out of the national dialogue, and then follow up on implementation plans. The draft proclamation is expected to pass in the coming weeks, and this will inevitably open up another phase in Ethiopia's democratization process anchored in inclusivity.
Tremendous destruction and looting of public and private properties marked the areas previously occupied by the terrorist TPLF. It was learned.
The attacks orchestrated by the terrorist TPLF on the various economic infrastructures, public and private institutions, are not a mere act of gang violence. Rather, they are part of a deliberate aim to weaken the overall capabilities of the nation. Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs Demeke Mekonnen made this remark following his visit to infrastructure destroyed and looted by the terrorist TPLF in Desse and Kombolcha towns of Amhara region. Hotels, universities, hospitals and factories are among the vandalized and looted properties in Desse and Kombolcha towns that the Deputy Prime Minister has visited. As war on the terrorist TPLF enters its decisive chapter, Ethiopian, the leader of the group, has written a letter to the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, which was circulating on social media on Monday. In it, the chairman made it look like the TPLF has accepted a call for ceasefire and that it has withdrawn its forces to that end. But questions loom large about the intent of TPLF and how this sudden gesture of peace should be treated. The following reportage sheds some light into it.
Tigray is an integral part of Ethiopia, but the terrorist group TPLF chairman Ethiopian seems to call the march of Ethiopian forces to the region as occupation, after losing a fortified military stronghold in the areas whose objective was said to be to cut the supply route to Djibouti and hold Ethiopia in a choke position. Losing battle became pervasive in the areas it controlled. In a span of less than 2 weeks, TPLF was forced to leave cities after cities in the western, eastern and Wolo front in the center. The last retreat came early this week after losing a battle in Gashana and Lalibela. In a letter to the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, leader of the previously invading Tigray forces, says air fighters outside of the region have been ordered to withdraw and return to the embattled federal state. He actually proposed an immediate ceasefire to be followed by negotiations. Other proposals in the letter include the establishment of a no-fly zone for over Tigray to prevent what the Brazilian dubbed hostile flights. The Ethiopian constitution does not allow regional states to deal with the international community on their own. So the question of who the TPLF thinks is commencing. Getachew Reda, the not-raised mouthpiece of the TPLF, confirmed on Monday that the withdrawal was complete. He went to the extent of accusing the international community of dragging Air's feet over putting enough pressure on Ethiopia. When Tzadkan Gebretensai appeared on Tigray television for one interview right after the TPLF force took control of Desse and Kombolcha, he said the war is over. He spoke as if the government was collapsing and that there is no entity to negotiate with.
ከዛ በኋላም ኢንተንሲፋይድ የሆነ ዓለም አቀፍ ህብረተሰቡም አቴንሽን እየሰጠው እኛም ኮንዲሽናችን እያስቀመጥን መተናል።
I am personally wondering if there should be any talk of dialogue at this time. What dialogue are they talking about? The war is over now. Who is the TPLF negotiating with? Because there is no entity from now onwards.
The TPLF does not have a history of advocacy for peace. Chauvinism and military adventurism are the things that it is known for. There had been initiatives for peace in Ethiopia, both before and after the war broke out in November 2020. The TPLF leaders, as expressed through the spokesperson Getachew Radda, touted the call for ceasefire a sick joke.
But we know, as the saying goes, it takes two to tango, and Abiy Ahmed has been adamant that the only solution to this problem is military one. And the military solution has proved absolutely elusive. And there is no chance whatsoever that Abiy can ever achieve his ambitions militarily. And as we speak, our forces are beating Abiy's forces black and blue. And there is no chance whatsoever that they could survive.
The Brazilians later may be an attempt to avert the Ethiopian army's advance towards Mekelle in an apparent attempt to destroy the TPLF once and for all. It was after that the TPLF forces took control of extensive areas in the Afar and Amhara regions of Ethiopia, leading to a humanitarian crisis that affected more than 9 million people. Over 1.4 million people were displaced. TPLF massacred thousands of civilians in both regions and unleashed the destruction of private and public properties. The destruction to Wollo University alone, as disclosed by the university, is estimated to be about 10 billion Ethiopian birr.
So having the diaspora.
Ethiopia has been imaged differently from the reality.
Out of U.S. policy change towards...
The real reasons they wanted to maintain the blockade is that they wanted
and also some pressure is on the Ethiopian government, and they are just taking the domestic issue to the international arenas like the UN and...
What's the picture you have about the Ethiopian diaspora? Nowadays it seems that their beauty is blossoming.
The suspension of Ethiopia from AGOA isn't likely to have a serious impact.
You're watching Addis News Hour. Scholars say some Western forces are lobbying for the relocation of conferences destined to be held in Addis Ababa because of Ethiopia's resistance to foreign meddling in its internal matters. Part of the solution to the issue, they say, is that Africans need to stand together as true children of Adwa and with the spirit of Pan-Africanism. Jerusalem Betzaha reports.
In the past 2 decades, Ethiopia has been the stage when the two superpowers competing in the Horn of Africa. Particularly, the US has been putting its pressure on Ethiopia's internal matter in different regimes, including in the TPLF regime. This has cost Ethiopia much, historians said.
We know how we paid during the last 27 years. The policies, they give you aid. They interfere in the affairs of your state. They say SAP, structural adjustment program, make this, make that, change this policy and the like. Those policies do have their own negative impacts on each and every citizen of the nation. Therefore, we tested that severe operation during the last 27 years.
But now, when the Ethiopian government begins to resist their interference, they have been trying to put their pressure against Ethiopia in different ways. Currently, some corners are lobbying for relocating conference destined to be held in Addis Ababa, which is a good testimony for that. Talking to ETV, scholars said that this is the US and its allies' intention against Ethiopia to diminish its political and economic power.
They try to put Ethiopia, it's an attempt to put Ethiopia in quagmire. That means, if there are diplomatic offices, international organizations here, it is beneficial to Ethiopia, to its economy, to its influence, to different activities. Many foreign investors come, contribute to the development of the country. Shifting the offices of this international diplomatic offices would mean is to paralyze the economy of Ethiopia and then to make Ethiopia poor, because Ethiopia resisted foreign influence, foreign interventions in the affairs of our nations.
The issue of moving African Union headquarters can be, for them, from their perspective, can be an instrument to disempower Ethiopia, not only economically, but also politically and socially. Ethiopia, because of historical reason, is seen by African brothers and sisters as a role model, as a sign of resilience, sovereignty, and freedom.
The heart of the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa, also known as the capital city of Africa, due to its historical, diplomatic, and political significance for the continent. That's why the African Union headquarters, the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, and other international institutions choose Addis, the scholar said.
Why Ethiopia? The only independent black country in the world, never colonized. That's the reason why when the Organization of African Unity, way back in May 1963, was established, that's where unanimously African brothers and sisters said Ethiopia is the rightful place to hold that. Second, why? Because of Ethiopia's contributions in the fight against colonialism and neocolonialism, and Ethiopia's active role in Pan-Africanism. Third, it's a peaceful country. Literally, Addis, compared to other cities, is very peaceful.
Solidarity among Africans as one with the spirit of Pan-Africanism is significant to withstand such kind of Western powers' interest on Africa.
We have to revive the spirit of Pan-Africanism. And I think, fortunately, Ethiopians in the country, in the diaspora, are already active in this regard. We know the No More movement started with Ethiopians, supported with Eritreans, now supported by all Africans and even Asians and so on. We need to work on that. And then that will help us to make sure that they will not succeed.
This is a clear sign of American negative attitude towards our nation, because we resisted as the children of Adwa. We should do that also, of course. We should resist foreign imposition, foreign influence in our internal affair. Africans should stood firmly by the side of Ethiopia, because the Western power see Ethiopia as a symbol.
I don't think so. They will succeed. The majority of Africans, it's their right to float this wrong idea, but when it comes to decision, it has to be decided in protocol-wise. All members should gather together and decide. That will not happen. This is regarding African unity. Regarding United Nations specialized agencies, anything goes. The United Nations is being put under pressure now. Ethiopia is also under the pressure now. I wouldn't be surprised if some agencies of the UN report back negatively, and if they want to close. It's their choice. It's their choice. I don't think they will do it.
Addis Ababa, which is called New Flower in Amharic language, is preparing to receive and to provide standard service for the coming 1 million Ethiopians in the diaspora and Ethiopian friends to celebrate Christmas with other Ethiopian cities and towns.
Ethiopia is eyeing inclusive dialogues to solve some of its internal issues, says State Minister Redwan Hussein. In an exclusive interview with Anadolu Agency, the State Minister disclosed that Ethiopia will ensure inclusivity of all agendas at stake, including controversial constitutional elements, to be discussed in a planned national dialogue for a lasting solution to the internal issues. Johannes Fentahun has produced the following story.
On the sidelines of the Turkey-African Partnership Summit, State Minister Redwan Hussein spent some time with Anadolu Agency outlining current issues unfolding in Ethiopia. He says Ethiopia is moving forward for a broadened political landscape through a planned dialogue. He also added the dialogue is open for any reasonable discussion which may be culminated as far as the referendum. Regarding the controversies in the Ethiopian constitution that are long urged to be debated nationwide, the state minister has the following to say.
Ethiopia is regaining its calmness, and the government is now gaining all its territories, and now it is opening its hands for everybody, not only the government, but the new inclusive dialogue would solve any discords that we used to have, because it will be solved in a civil manner. And then we can amend our constitution, we can adjust anything that all Ethiopians could see themselves relevant to participate in this wider and broader process. The political space is being broadened, including the constitution. All its elements are open for discussion. And now if anyone has a solid, tangible, plausible, attainable reason to bring about to the open, then it is free to participate in the discussion. And finally, it might be culminated in the referendum.
Stressing the blatant rejection of reconciliation efforts by the government, he said the TPLF made it hard on itself to bring a civil solution. Despite a major propaganda campaign the terrorist group is still propagating, Ethiopian forces have pushed the rebel group out of the places which it invaded. Ethiopians are also showing strong solidarity against explicit interferences in the country's internal affairs, he said.
We are complaining the number of partners, particularly some countries from the West, and most of their medias are actually supporting this rebel group. They don't seem to wish this conflict to be over. We cannot avoid interference. There is political, geopolitical interest. There always had been Africa in a position of being taken advantage of. Now Ethiopia has been one of them, even though it's never been colonized, but we've been subjected to a number of sabotage and pushings and interferences.
Redwan has also taken the occasion to heal the century-old relations between Ethiopia and Turkey.
Our interests have never been crossed. Our interests would always manage to go along, and I think this time around, so we can pull together, and I think the prognosis is we are progressing well, and then it will going to continue prospering in a very economic, political, and all aspects.
The state minister has also addressed questions regarding the Ethiopia-Sudan issues. Despite provocations, particularly from the military wing of the Sudanese transitional government, Redwan says Ethiopia has refused to respond because it believed that the conflict was instigated by an artificial issue created by external actors, which is of no use for both countries. According to him, Ethiopia and Sudan have their internal challenges to engage on besides their border issue. This small case was cooked by some external actors with vested interests of aggravating the problem in both countries.
When we unite, we will say no more to TPLF. When we unite, we will say no more to USA. We believe and understand USA has changed the narrative of the story and completely diverted into Ethiopia attacking the terrorist group. But the actual truth is the terrorist group TPLF is actually attacking Ethiopia.
ያው የአሜሪካ መንግስት እንዴት አህያ ከሚገል ጋር ከብት ከሚገል ጋር ሽማግሌ የታመመ ሽማግሌ መድኃኒት የማያድነው ሽማግሌ ከሚገል ጋር የአሜሪካ መንግስት እንዴት ይህ ሊረዳ ሊደግፍ ይችላል ነው ምለው ነው።
Residents of Raya Qobo town, Amhara region in Ethiopia, said the TPLF terrorist group has massacred more than 120 civilians in the town. In addition to massacring civilians in various parts of Amhara and Afar, the TPLF has carried out extensive looting and destruction of properties during its occupation of areas in the regions. The residents also told ENA the terrorist group brutally massacred innocent people in Raya Qobo town and raped several women, including pregnant ones. Eyewitnesses also said that the group has committed atrocities on residents of the town that should not have happened on human beings, demonstrating its barbaric cruelty by massacring more than 120 civilians in Raya Qobo. The residents said they are now happy as the combined forces of Ethiopia have wiped out the terrorist group and liberated the areas from the invaders. Ambassador and permanent representative of Ethiopia to the United Nations, Taye Atqasilase, underlined that zero amount of lies and excuses evades TPLF's culpability against Ethiopia. The terrorist TPLF will disarm and be held accountable to the full force of the law. The promise of peace is in reconciliation between all Ethiopians who respect and abide by the rule of law, the ambassador added. Exposing the obvious flaws in the so-called international organizations, the United Nations has demanded yet another unfettered humanitarian access to Tigray. While doing so, the UN failed to condemn the TPLF-led destructions and lootings on health facilities and other public institutions worth billions of dollars. Tigist Sarnesa looks into it.
We call again today for unfettered humanitarian access.
Ethiopia last June claimed a unilateral ceasefire to help war victims and to improve humanitarian access to the war-torn Tigray. Unfortunately, the unilateral ceasefire was denounced as a sick joke by the TPLF warmongers. The TPLF used this gesture to regroup and expand the conflict to neighboring Amhara and Afar regions.
Announcement of unilateral ceasefire should be treated with the contempt it so richly deserves, because it is so vacuous, it means nothing.
US government is saying that another immediate urgent precondition for a ceasefire must be you withdrawing your forces from Amhara and from Afar regions, and I want to know if you're prepared to do that.
We're not prepared to do that.
The TPLF committed a number of atrocities that claimed the lives of dozens of unarmed civilians, which included children. This waits for an immediate denunciation from United Nations as soon as, although none has come so far. The United Nations Human Rights Council, together with the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, conducted an investigation that can be taken as an authentic witness that younger women and also women as old as 85 were gang raped by TPLF terrorist group that might not need any further explanation to designate the belligerent group as terrorist remnants already.
The man in Maikadra attacked with machetes by the Samri Tigrayan youth group, shot in the back and thrown into a fire.
It is to be recalled that the United Nations Human Rights Council held a video conference special session on Friday to address what is called the grave human rights situation in Ethiopia. Ethiopia and all the African representatives, together with the likes of China, Russia, Cuba and Turkey, have rejected the proposal, which was passed with a simple majority. Connecting the dots, one can see that the new wave is aimed at finding a pretext to further pressurize Ethiopia with a fake genocide.
arrived 3 days ago coming from Erbil, Iraq, and I had booked this hotel here, Grand Royal Hotel, online before coming, and I come walking up the street here. I had gotten a taxi from the airport and traffic was bad, and so he dropped me off a few blocks down that way, and I come walking up and I realized I recognize this square and the statue of the guy right there. Let's get across the street here. The Nile River is right out there.
And finally, from across Africa, business representatives from the Democratic Republic of Congo's private sector attended the Rwandan National Trade Fair for the very first time on Monday. The event presents an opportunity to the two countries not just to make sales and exhibit the new products, but also to sign a trade agreement with the Rwandan Private Sector Federation that will facilitate trade and boost business cooperation between the countries. Stakeholders in the agreement further called on the inclusion of local traders in the deal for the benefit of locals between the two countries. The agreement comes after the DRC announced it would be joining the East African region, hoping to boost its exports to other countries in the region. There's a lot of cross-border trading that includes agricultural products, according to Africa News. You're watching Addis News Hour. A quick reminder of the day's headlines. TPLF forces retreat to Tigray while thug leaders beg for peace. Lobbying against Addis as conference hub comes after resistance to foreign aggression.